Good evening, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone, to Week 8 of our seminar series, Education's Digital Future, Equity by Design. It's been a really exciting series thus far, and we're really delighted to have another session. My name is Amber Levinson. I'm a research associate with the TELOS initiative. TELOS is a new initiative dedicated to technology for equity in learning opportunities. This week we're going to be talking about the future of reading and writing. And we have some amazing speakers here to talk about preparing youth to be readers and writers in the digital age, as well as preparing teachers and university students to do this work. For those of you who are joining for the first time, the seminar series is dedicated to issues at the intersection of technology, equity, and learning. How many of you are here for the first time? Wow, excellent. Cool, about a third of you. And part of our goal with the seminar is to facilitate new conversations across education, practice, research, industry, and beyond. So we always like to see who we have in the room. Can you raise your hand if you're a Stanford student? Great, representing. University faculty or staff? Awesome. Classroom educators? Fabulous. School and district leaders? Wonderful to have you here. Industry professionals? Great. Nonprofit folks? Community? How about parents? Oh, wow. All right, people are like, am I a parent? I'm not sure. All right, everyone give yourselves a round of applause for being here. All right. Oops. Let me see. Oh, you know what? I don't think I turned it on. Oh, it was on? Okay, there we go. Now we're ready. So during our session today, we encourage you to tweet using our hashtag EDFEquity. In case you didn't get that, there it is. And each week we're happy to have lightning talks to open each of our sessions. So before I introduce our featured speakers, I'll introduce this week's wonderful lightning talk speaker who will kick us off tonight. So we're thrilled to have with us Catlin Tucker. Catlin is a Google certified educator, teacher, best-selling author, international trainer, and frequent ed tech speaker, who currently teaches in Sonoma County, where she was named Teacher of the Year in 2010. Catlin's first book, Blended Learning in Grades 4 to 12, is a bestseller, and her most recent book, Creatively Teach the Common Core Literacy Standards with Technology, was published in June 2015. Catlin writes the Techie Teacher column for Educational Leadership, so many of you may be familiar with her work. She's active on Twitter at Catlin_Tucker and writes an internationally ranked education blog at catlintucker.com. So welcome, Catlin.
All right. Well, thank you guys for having me. This is my 14th year in the classroom, and what I've noticed over the years is that technology is creating a growing divide between the classroom and life beyond. Many students are disillusioned with school, they question the relevancy of what they're learning, and there are three notable disconnects between the classroom and life that particularly kind of relate to this idea of literacy. First is that there are a lot of classrooms that are still conforming to the one-size-fits-all approach to teaching, even though our students are in wildly different places as readers and writers. Learning isn't personalized for individual students, yet the minute they walk outside of our classroom door, they can access limitless amounts of information and can customize their own learning. Second, the tools used in each space are really different. Most classrooms are still using pen, paper, and books, while outside of class, students are choosing from a wide range of tools. They increasingly use devices, social media, and online resources. And thirdly, in the classroom, a traditional classroom, the only audience for a student's work is the teacher. And so this disconnect is something I want to talk about when we talk about the future of reading and writing, because I think we can use technology to teach literacy, but also to bridge these gaps. So the first part of my teaching career, I was really restricted to the books in my school book room. There was a limited supply, and so it was almost impossible for me to personalize learning for individual students. And as I think about the past and how I had to choose from this small collection of books, I realized that I wasn't able to accommodate students at different reading levels. I wasn't able to give students a choice about what they were reading because I was limited to this finite amount of text that I was choosing from. And what's interesting about technology is it opens up these doors where we all of a sudden can honor students at different reading levels. We can honor student interest and choice. We can use online tools like Newsela and Smithsonian Tween Tribune that allows educators to change the complexity of a text, making it more or less challenging, so that if we have students who are at a lower reading level, they don't have to be left out of the conversation. We just have to figure out how to connect them with a text they can access and understand. In the issue of student choice, the kind of emergence of online literacy programs like StudySync, and there's a growing number of them, they have these huge digital libraries full of texts that range from nonfiction pieces to graphic novels to famous speeches. So we have the opportunity to begin thinking about how do we connect students with texts they're really going to enjoy, that are at a level that makes sense for them. Another problem or disconnect between school and life beyond are the tools that students are being asked to use. Increasingly outside of the classroom, kids are turning to technology tools to navigate many of life's tasks and challenges. And so for me, when I think about the tools I'm using to develop literacy in the classroom, two have been particularly helpful. One is Diigo, and the other has been Google Documents. As students are kind of consuming more digital text online, it becomes really important that they take those active reading strategies that they've classically done with pen and paper and apply them to the online environment. Otherwise, it is far too tempting for them to skim instead of read. And so we start and we practice. What does it look like to apply pen and paper reading strategies to the online space? And Diigo literally allows students to highlight anything they read online, make notes, comments, ask questions, and everything that they do using Diigo is automatically saved to their Diigo account. So they can return to it just like they might return to a dog-eared page of a traditional text. As I think about writing, so reading is a very individual experience, but writing is definitely meant for an audience. And in the first half of my own teaching career, I spent about 90% of my time really focused on assessing a finished product, and only about 10% of my time giving students feedback along the way as they wrote. As soon as I found Google Documents, that changed. Now my students get ongoing feedback from the moment they start an assignment because I've had access to their documents and can see exactly what they're doing. I also moved writing back into the classroom. I flip my writing instructions, students watch videos at home, and we use our valuable class time together to write. So I'll frequently take them into the computer lab. I literally open up all of the documents for every student in my class, and I dive in, making comments, suggestions, pointing them to online resources. And because I'm in their documents as they're working, often fielding a ton of comments in the instant chat window, I also get to experience more aha moments where kids realize, oh, this is how I fix this mistake, or here's how I develop analysis. And I quickly realized that writing and feedback should not be done in isolation. It must be an ongoing conversation. Lastly, I think we need to consider how our ability to connect, publish, and share is impacting students' reality both outside the classroom and hopefully inside of the classroom too. My students start the year writing passion blogs, and they can write about anything they're passionate about. I have kids blogging about what it's like to be a teenager, kids writing about tips for how to play the ukulele, step-by-step directions for drawing Pokemon characters. And I've seen kids who struggle to find their voice in the classroom thrive online. And blogging is just the beginning. Students start YouTube channels, they publish their multimedia work, they publish digital portfolios, and they deliver TED-style talks. Last year, I decided to use the TED Ed team's curriculum to walk students through the process of kind of identifying an idea we're sharing, writing a script, putting together a presentation, and recording their talks. And though many were really daunted at the beginning, I was so impressed with the depth of their ideas, their poise, their confidence. And early this year, I got a call from TED offering to fly one of my students, Anna, to New York City, where she was invited to give her talk on the TED stage. And I think this is such a powerful reminder that we as educators cannot allow our own fear to limit what we do. We really need to connect students with that authentic audience. So, what will the future of reading and writing be? I hope it is one in which we strive to personalize learning. We use tools that students can use long after they leave our class to continue learning. And it's one in which we value their voices by connecting them to an authentic audience. Yes, technology has created a divide, but it can also help to bridge that divide. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Catlin. Okay. So now I'd like to introduce our featured speakers and moderator for this evening. Elizabeth Soep, who's going to be our first speaker, is Senior Producer and Research Director at Youth Radio, the Oakland-based youth-driven production company that serves as NPR's official youth desk. The youth radio stories Lissa has produced with teen reporters for public media outlets have been recognized with honors, including 2 Peabody Awards, 3 Murrow Awards, an Investigative Reporters and Editors Award, and the Robert F. Kennedy Journalism Award. With a PhD from Stanford University's School of Education right here at home, Lissa has written about digital media and learning for academic journals such as Harvard, Educational Review, popular outlets, and books including Participatory Politics, Drop That Knowledge, and Youthscapes. With Asha Richardson, she co-founded Youth Radio's Innovation Lab, which is a partnership with UC Berkeley and MIT that was among the first projects worldwide where youth partner with professional developers to create apps and interactives that engage their communities. So Lissa will be talking about her work. Adam Banks, our second speaker, is a professor here at the Graduate School of Education and new faculty director of the program in Writing and Rhetoric. Prior to arriving at Stanford, he served on the faculty of the Department of Writing, Rhetoric, and Digital Studies at the University of Kentucky and the Syracuse University Writing Program. He is author of Digital Griots, African American Rhetoric in a Multimedia Age, and Race, Rhetoric, and Technology, Searching for Higher Ground, which was awarded the Computers in Composition 2007 Best Book Award. Oh, we have so many speakers with so many qualifications. Our third speaker, Cherise McBride, is a PhD student in the Graduate School of Education at the University of California, Berkeley. She teaches courses in the Multicultural Urban Secondary Education Master's and Credential Program on Digital Pedagogy and Practicum Field Supervision. So she'll be talking about her work preparing teachers. She is also a teacher consultant with Bay Area Writing Project, where she provides instructional coaching and professional development to in-service teachers. With a decade of experience teaching English in the high school, adult school, and community college levels, Cherise is committed to training urban educators to consider the multiple literacies and strengths that youth bring with them to the classroom, and to consider the ways that literacy is shifting in the 21st century. Finally, our moderator, Petra Dierkes-Thrun, teaches comparative literature and feminist gender and sexuality studies here at Stanford, and she's director of interdisciplinary teaching and learning and special assistant to the vice provost for teaching and learning. She is running Stanford's Year of Learning this year, which is partnering for this week's event. And in her own teaching, Petra is an advocate of digital pedagogy to support and develop ideas and blueprints for blended learning in the traditional humanities. So welcome to all of them. We're going to start with Lissa, and we have a real treat this evening with all these wonderful speakers.
Thank you so much for having me, Amber. Thanks for that wonderful introduction, and I'm excited to be a part of this conversation and to get us started talking about reading and writing for civic agency in digital times. And I'm going to be talking about this set of issues from 2 points of view. As Amber mentioned, I am a part of an organization that's based in Oakland called Youth Radio, which is a youth-driven production company where young people come to us in the afternoons and they produce media for National Public Radio and a range of other outlets. And that media takes various forms from investigative reported series, personal commentary, mobile apps, interactive news content, videos, etc. The other point of view that I want to bring to the conversation is as a member of the Youth and Participatory Politics Research Network that I've been a part of for several years now. And that's a group of scholars and researchers who are interested in both understanding and building support for learning environments where young people are using digital and social media and the other forms of connectivity that increasingly define their lives to express voice and agency in public spheres. So I'm delighted that our lightning talk ended on this point of the possibilities that are contained within scenarios where young people can release their work to public audiences, because that's frankly what my work is all about. It is all in the public sphere, for better or worse. So it was a great way to cue off the conversation. And I'm going to focus in particular in the time that I have on investigation, which is a process that is so central to journalism and so central to civic life. And it also happens to be an aspect of what we call participatory politics that really is changing in fundamental ways as a result of the tools and platforms that young people have access to. And equity, of course, is central to any conversation about investigation, both in terms of who gets to drive the conversation, so who is participating in framing the questions and collecting the data that will inform whatever the outcome of that investigation turns out to be, and then what kind of impact can that investigation achieve in the lives of the young people that we collaborate with and the communities that they're a part of. So I started with this image that is kind of an iconic image of what we think about, or what many of us may think about when we talk about youth media, right? So it's a young person holding a mic, getting an interview or commentary from a peer. But increasingly, this is more an image that would define how media is being produced and stories are being both collected and told from within a youth-driven newsroom like Youth Radio. So Billy is kind of in a panopticon of mobile devices where his every move is being captured. This particular image was taken on a very exciting week a couple of months ago when Morning Edition, NPR's biggest news show, broadcast live for an entire week out of our studios in Oakland. And Billy and his peers in this image were both taking to the airwaves and producing the stories that you heard on the air in the middle of the night in Oakland that was airing live on the East Coast at a more reasonable hour. But they were also, collecting and sharing their stories through Snapchat, through Instagram, through their own social feeds. And so there's this proliferation of tools and apps and platforms that they have at their disposal, both to collect their stories and to distribute them to the widest possible audience. And this particular image is from one of the apps that the team, our youth team, has created. It's called West Side Stories, and it's an interactive map that's tracking gentrification in one neighborhood in Oakland, West Oakland in particular. And each of those icons is takes you to a location in the city that the young people have identified as being really pivotal in that story of change. So what's important for us to think about in terms of the future of reading and writing is that young people are not just users of these tools and platforms, but they're actually creating the content and the user experience for how these stories are told. And that's really what Asha Richardson and I took as an opportunity 6 years ago now in the formation of our Innovation Lab, which is a space that we've built with, as Amber said, with our partners at MIT and UC Berkeley, where young people can build tools like West Side Stories that give them a place to share their points of view and invite others to engage as well. So I wanted to talk about, very briefly, 4 different opportunities for learning that I see in these digital times. and how they register in the space of reading and writing. So I'm going to talk about critical computational literacy, which is a framework that my wonderful colleague Cliff Lee, who's also a part of the National Writing Project, has framed, and we're really deepening through our work at Youth Radio. Talk about this idea of digital afterlife. What happens after a piece of media that young people have been produced goes out into the public sphere and sometimes takes on a life of its own. What does investigation through public engagement look like? So not public engagement as the after effect of an investigation that young people produce, but it is in that real-time public back and forth that facts are discovered and stories are unearthed. And then finally, how do we move, as my colleague Danielle Allen from our research network says, from voice to agency and impact? So it's one thing for young people to tell a story, to compose a story. What does it take for that process to yield impact and the social issues that they care about? So this first slide has to do with this notion of really something that's quite popular today, which is this idea that all kids need to code. How many people are getting that message through invitations to hackathons and funding opportunities and after-school programs that make it possible and make lots of bold claims about how important it is and what young people can do once they learn to code? But what Cliff really came up with and pushes us to do in our work at Youth Radio is to marry what we talk about as critical pedagogy with computational thinking. And so the app that you see across the top of the slide is one that a youth team at Youth Radio is working on and getting ready to release in the Google Play Store, called Mood Ring, which is offers an opportunity for young people to track how they're feeling using any combination of these emojis, and then get a report every 2 weeks that tells them how they've done that week and encourages them to reach out for help when needed. So it's an experiment in social and emotional health that the young people created. And when you look at the discourse involved in producing this app, yes, they had to learn to code, and that's what we're looking at here. This is App Inventor, which is a tool that makes it possible for novice programmers to build apps that are you can publish in the Google Play Store. But they're also having to make really thoughtful decisions about, for example, how do you build an app that makes it possible for young people who may be experiencing post-traumatic stress disorder to reach out to communities and peers as opposed to experience isolation. So that's what we hold as a bar for ourselves, is critical computational literacy as the driver of teaching kids to code. And we ask ourselves, instead of kind of echoing the mantra, code for all, we always ask, code for what? For what outcome? And then to build the curriculum on the basis of that. And then there's the reminder of digital afterlife. So, you know, sometimes I do want to push back a little bit on this idea that our young people, as an end in itself, need to release their work to real audiences. Because we all know what happens when those real audiences get hold of the work. Sometimes they say nothing, and then you have the despair of having put months and years into a project that has nothing underneath it. Sometimes you have the opposite. This is a project that my young colleague Desmond Megley worked on for NPR. It's a story about the elevated risk of suicide that is associated with having guns in the home. And he reported this piece. It was a very personal story for himself, and he got personal narrative from other individuals that he interviewed for the piece. And I don't know if you can see, this story yielded more than 1,000 comments on NPR's site. So there's a whole process of learning and period of learning in the afterlife of these projects that we as educators and collaborators and co-producers with youth need to be anticipating and preparing for. Really thinking about making choices about what's put out into the world, anticipating what an audience or a community is going to do with that, and knowing how we're going to participate in that conversation in a thoughtful and ethical way. The third opportunity in this future of reading and writing is, as I said, investigation through public engagement. And this has been a real flip for us even at Youth Radio, where our habit had been that we would produce a story, we'd get it on the air, and then the public engagement would happen as a way to sort of spread the story, get it to more and more, to the awareness of more and more people. What you see here is actually a live experiment. So this week we have the final story in a series that we produced with National Public Radio is airing Thursday or Friday of this week on All Things Considered. And along with that story, which is all about the future of fast food, we are releasing a map that our young people have produced that documents meals that young people can buy from all across the country for $5 or less. And the data for the map was generated through outreach via Instagram and Twitter. So call-outs through those channels to invite people to share how they can find affordable meals in their communities. And so what you have is live, real-time investigation that is visible to the world as that material is being collected. So there's real risk involved, and as I said, the similar risk to Desmond's NPR story, anything from what if nobody responds to what if people share images that we wouldn't want to feature in the map. How do we manage decisions about what gets highlighted and what doesn't? So we're seeing an opportunity with this experiment to really play with different models for enlisting communities to participate in the reporting as opposed to serve as audiences for youth voice. And then that brings us to this trajectory of what it takes to move from voice to civic agency and impact. And this is a slide that is from a series that Youth Radio did a couple of years ago called Double Charged, which was reporting on the fines and fees that families are hit with when children and their families have become involved in the juvenile justice system. So many of us may not know that when a young person serves time in juvenile hall or gets fitted with a GPS monitor on the ankle after being arrested, that their family members are charged for those activities on a daily basis. So every night that a young person spends in juvenile hall or every day that they're being monitored using GPS. And what happens is we start to see cycles of poverty that are reinforced through those mechanisms. So Youth Radio took on this series and investigated how are fines and fees assigned and what are their effects in the lives of young people. And just in the last month, early April, Alameda County announced a moratorium on assigning those fines and fees to families, and Youth Radio was explicitly credited for their reporting on playing a role in that shift in policy. So in many ways, that's the holy grail. That's what we seek, is that through young people's expression of voice, through their systematic investigations, they see a real change in what opportunities and what obstacles they face in their communities. So I wanted to, share that that sort of success and win, because I do hope to see more and more of those kinds of stories as more and more young people get access to these experiences. But I want to say that we also, the flip side of those kinds of outcomes is what can only be described as a kind of chilling effect that we've also seen at our newsroom, and it's also evident in the research that some of my colleagues are doing at Harvard at Project Zero, which is what the team at Harvard, Carrie James, is calling a hush falling over the crowd. When young people express civic voice and agency in public spheres, they have access to a range of moves and tactics to really be active in that space, but when conflict arises, or when institutions push back, you start to see a real pulling back from those public and vocal expressions. So as educators, I see that as a challenge and an opportunity for us to become much more intentional with our young people about managing conflict in the digital afterlife of their projects, and doing so with the backing of adult collaborators. So when I take a look at, just very briefly, the kinds of conditions for learning that we need to cultivate as we move with young people into this digital future, we need to sit with them and have ways to assess what are the risks associated with the stories that they want to tell when they do go out into the public sphere. How can they prepare for those risks and make thoughtful assessments, and how can we help them to do that from the vantage point of being adults who've seen this before and know what can go down when they put themselves out on a limb? And how do we stay with them in the digital afterlife? So we can't be with them side by side as they're producing and then disappear when they're fending off comments that can be quite hateful. How do we share in that experience as well? And how do we give access to to allies and to sources that are credible as they carry out their investigations. And then finally, how can we help them in assessing the tools that are best suited for the kinds of investigations that they want to carry out and the roles that they are and are not willing to play once their work goes out into the world. So thank you very much.
So first of all, we good in the back? You can hear me? Cool. So I found this presentation about what youth radio is doing to be, not just inspiring, but truly compelling example of the best of what can happen when writing and writing instruction take place in an environment of collaborative, of co-inquiry, and so that's really sitting with me as I offer these comments from a slightly different place in our conversation tonight. A few words from some others that I want to invoke before I share anything that I think I might want to offer tonight. The first is a quote from Manning Marable in a piece titled "Living Black History, Resurrecting the African American Intellectual Tradition." Today's elitist discourse of liberal multiculturalism speaks the safe language of symbolic representation, but rarely of resistance. Our scholarship indeed must be rigorous and objective, but if it lacks vision or is not informed in its substructure by passionate collective memory, how meaningful can it be? The second comes from a scholar named Tony Bolden. He says, the funk operates as a distinct form of black vernacular epistemology. Then the third from the book of Funkadelic. Here's a chance to dance our way out of our constrictions. The thoughts I have about the future of writing are situated, shared from the perspective of someone thinking about writing instruction and how programs and departments in writing and rhetoric can or should respond to the profound social and technological changes and dislocations we find ourselves in. The future of writing instruction for sure is tied completely and intensely to the question of whether or not we want to be free. For the time that is mine tonight, I want to talk about the future of writing from the perspective of college and university writing and rhetoric programs from the title, Do We Want the Funk, or Are We Still Whistling Vivaldi? The short version of what I want to offer in this conversation is that the future of writing is here, but we have not caught up to it because we're not listening to and learning from the right people. On my way to developing this point, I want to offer a few provocations around what I believe are the large challenges those charged with teaching writing and building programs in writing and rhetoric will have to address. The first of these challenges is the idea that writing is somehow tangential to intellectual inquiry. There is a danger of thinking of writing, of rhetoric in all its modalities as something we teach students on their way to doing the real work in their undergraduate majors and in their master's and doctoral programs. Even here at Stanford, where we get the most talented students in the world, literally in many cases, there is a need and a hunger for writing instruction and support at every level of their education. Doctoral students who are already world-renowned experts in some cases are beating down the doors of our Hume Center for Writing and Speaking because they have figured out that all of their content knowledge and expertise are not enough when they have to work on a dissertation or an article or a scholarly presentation. So the first challenge for us in thinking about the future of writing instruction is understanding that writing is central to intellectual inquiry, to professional success, to the many kinds of participatory culture that have emerged in our messy relationships with digital networked technologies. Writing is not the side dish or the side piece. Writing and rhetoric are areas for sustained, ongoing inquiry over a lifetime, central to not only global citizenship, but also to any hope we have in the pursuit of deep democracy and social justice here at home. Which brings me to the second challenge for the future of writing and writing instruction, which is, as you saw on the slide as we were gathering earlier, that diversity is not enough. We have to decolonize writing instruction. Again, speaking from this very localized perspective, we bring students here from all over the world, from every culture, ethnicity, sexuality, gender expression, social and economic class imaginable. How we conceive of writing, the richness of it, and of writing instruction has to be worthy of the students we bring here. This might seem to be obvious until we start to unpack what that means. For me, it means centering indigenous people, Latinx people, queer folk, black folk, international folk, their truths, tropes, traditions, and practices in everything from our course design to our assignments, our evaluation and feedback strategies, as well as our content and teacher stance. This is a moment when the idea of standards, no matter how much they might run our national conversation, mean very little to me. In fact, everything about where I want writing instruction to go is already happening. In the practices of people we bemoan when we get into our get off my lawn, young people don't do rants and rambles. Young people don't know how to write anymore because of all this texting. Young people don't know the language anymore. Young people don't know how to write because they lack the social cues that would happen from real human-to-human interaction because of all this time they're spending online. So one step we have to take if we're going to decolonize writing instruction, and this is only the beginning, is break down some of our ideas about expertise. Take a hard look at what kinds of expertise we value. The way to the future is in everything that we've dismissed because it's too funky. It's not clean. It's not polished. The scores aren't what they ought to be. But everything I want to learn about writing is in those spaces and with those people we've decided don't belong here. The way to the future is by going to school with, to learn from, not to teach, the very people that we would never admit to at Stanford. But I suspect you've invited me here for a slightly different conversation, so let me move on to a few more of the big picture challenges that I see the future of writing and writing instruction demanding of us. When I think about the future of writing from the perspective of how our constantly changing technological landscape changes writing practices, there are a few main questions that stay on my mind. What happens to the act or acts of writing to writing practices when the keyboard is no longer our main interface for computing? What happens to writing, to composing messages of all kinds and all modalities when immersive environments become more commonplace? And then three, this is something we've heard at least gestured to by everyone so far. How do we navigate the increasing possibilities for individual and collective agency that technological shifts seem to bring with the ways that inequality becomes congealed, even hardwired into our society because of the concentrations of economic, political, and social power and capital that our reverence of all things tech seems to inspire? It is in this nexus of rapid technological change and rapid social change that the future of writing and writing instruction must reside. And this brings us to an almost impossible task, but in that seeming impossibility is where the life, where the possibility, where the excitement lie for me. The future of writing and writing instruction are in universities coming to understand the centrality of writing and rhetoric, to every level of education as both inquiry and practice. The future of writing instruction lies in moving beyond an instrumentalist approach to technologies and understand that tech and media issues writ large are important areas of inquiry into writing and rhetoric. The future of writing instruction lies in the goal of preparing ourselves and our students to contribute to deep democracy through healthy public discourse, through creating and participating in spaces for safe, engaged dialogue on the big questions, the messy and difficult issues, and even the seemingly mundane everyday. What is the role of writing and creating these spaces and this commitment to thinking together? To put it differently, the future of our democracy is at stake in the future of writing, and we got a glimpse of this from our president at his commencement address at Rutgers a few days ago. Finally, the future of writing is fundamentally about choosing decolonization over diversity. It is about reframing, reimagining, retheorizing. This future, especially when we think about writing instruction, is whether we really want to be free or whether we're still content whistling Vivaldi. Funk's boldness, wildness, mastery, and irreverence offer us another answer, and maybe even some freedom if we're willing to get up and move. Thank you.
Good evening. I am here from just across the bay I'm a student, a PhD student at UC Berkeley, and I also teach in our teacher education program, which I'm going to be talking to you about tonight. Our topic tonight is now to take all these ideas and think about how are we going to train teachers for the future of reading and writing. So I work in the MUSE program, which stands for the Multicultural Urban Secondary English program. These are teachers who have come from all over the country to earn their teaching credential as well as their master's degree in urban education. And part of our posture is to imagine them and help them to imagine themselves as teacher leaders. What that means is that they are always assuming a stance of being the ones who are willing to take risks and being the ones who are committed to not just meeting the standards, but exceeding the standards that are put before them. The class that I'm going to talk to you about tonight is the one that I teach called Digital Pedagogy. The former name was Integrating Technology into Secondary English Instruction. And this is a required course for all of our students who come through the program. Essentially, as they come into the program, we have a wide variety of experience with technology, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about what that looks like. But again, our goal is to help our teachers to imagine themselves as future-ready educators. So what does that mean? Again, all of them are coming out. Another key part is that they are going to do a research project in their second year of the program. So we want them to continue to imagine themselves as researchers. So as we think about becoming a literacy instructor, it's important for us to imagine what literacy is like today. So taking from Gunther Kress in the New London Group, we have this essential quote that I wanted to share. We can no longer treat literacy or language as the sole, the main, let alone the major means for representation and communication. So this is really moving us toward a concept of multimodality when we think about literacy, right? So the future of reading and writing is not just alphabetic literacy, being able to read words on a page, but also being able to read images and understand elements of design in your own composition, as well as in the compositions that you may deconstruct. So the New London Group, of course, in my own research as a student, as a PhD student, is one of the central sources of inspiration as I think about how their work expands our notions of literacy in two important ways. One is that it takes into account more robustly the cultural and linguistic diversity of the audiences that we'll see in our global society. And the second, of course, is thinking about the technological affordances of the multimedia and the things that we are encountering today. So I wanted to give you that brief introduction. As we think about this course, one of the key pieces of information that we start with for our students is this definition of 21st century literacy, right? What does it mean to be literate in the 21st century? National Council of Teachers of English point out these really important characteristics where literacies, given the changes in technology that we see, our literate environments are much more complex and intense, and so we must possess multiple literacies, right? Literacies are plural, they are dynamic, they are malleable given the increase in technology that we'll see, and teachers must be prepared to face this kind of environment. This also involves, much like my colleagues here shared, in being able to process different information streams and think about multimedia text. So all these are components of literacy. I have some of our teachers who come along and say, I feel like we're being asked to teach so much, right? I'm just here to teach some of my favorite literature or some of the favorite things that I've read. But this is the reality that we're dealing with. And so in our program, our goal is to emphasize this across all the areas, not just in my digital pedagogy class, but in our urban education class, in our adolescent development classes. This goes across all of those. So in the work in working with teachers, I want to share with you tonight 3 design elements that have emerged. And again, this is ongoing research, but these are the elements that are emerging as we imagine what it means to create space for teachers to develop their own digital pedagogy. Okay. The first one is that these spaces must be participatory. So in our class, a central part is that the teachers are afforded space to tinker. They have that room to develop their own technological fluency so that they are able to eventually make those connections to how the technology is going to further their pedagogical and content goals. So that's what we see here. This is an actual picture from our lab. Our class takes place in a computer lab where students are able to, again, think about design, think about just getting their hands dirty with the various tools that they're going to encounter in their work. And this is sort of inevitable when we're thinking about technology integration, that teachers must have practice to explore these affordances of the technology. One thing I do want to highlight, though, is that although our group is relatively young, we have an age range currently about early 20s to mid-30s. I want to point out that the notion of the digital native is not always what it's cracked up to be, right? So although the teachers here may have a great degree of technological fluency in certain technologies that they're using in their own daily lives, it's still really important for us to have that space to explore particular technologies, being introduced to new technologies, and again, consider those content and pedagogical considerations that may come with exposure to more technologies. So in this, again, in this participatory space, another key component has been our integration of experienced practitioners who come in and demonstrate what they have done in their classrooms. And with that, they're able to model their choices for the content and the pedagogy, and which tools they use. Sometimes they're not using any tools, any technological tools, and that all goes into helping our teachers to understand how to take some of the theory and frameworks that we're using and actually apply them to the classroom. Because it's one thing to go through a semester-long course and kind of get these ideas and tinker around and try out things, but to actually hear what a teacher with years of practice has done in their classroom and how they've been able to blend those different aspects as really an art is really helpful for student growth. It also is important because it allows time to allows time for the practitioners to come in and model their own metacognitive structures as they share how they came to the decisions about what they're doing in their classroom and what didn't work as well. And lastly, this is also really important as it allows moving beyond technology just for technology's sake, but allowing an opportunity to see where it fits in the arc of a curriculum or in the arc of a school year, in the arc of the learning goals over the course of even a whole English department from 9th grade to 12th grade, for example. So in that way, these are not short demos. This is about 90 minutes where we have teachers come in and they have a chance to explain what they're doing and allow the teachers to play around with the tools as well. And that kind of comes from some of my work with the Bay Area Writing Project, which really values those types of spaces for demonstration. The last thing in that participatory element that I want to share is this notion of a connected educator that also has become really useful in our classroom. So we have our own hashtag, MuseDigPed, which sort of tracks what is happening in our class. You'll see that this offers students a space to engage and removes the four walls of our classroom so that they're able to engage with other educators out in the field and ask questions such as, does anyone here have any advice about using podcasts in your instruction? And they get real feedback, live feedback from teachers. This is also useful when we think about teacher retention rates in some ways, where teaching can feel so isolating. But having spaces like this allows them to potentially have a network that they can stay connected to. This is our Google Plus community, where again, experts and other practitioners have been invited in to have conversations with them about 21st century literacy. What does it mean to be literate in the 21st century? You'll see here, for example, when we're talking about civic media, one of our students wanted to do a project that was inspired, and another person here who's a professor down in Denver came along and gave some feedback and shared resources. You'll see 5 comments going on. You know, they're having an extensive conversation that wouldn't really be possible without the use of some of the technologies. So this has been, it's proven useful also in removing sort of this false notion that any one person can be an expert on all of these things digital. So even me as the instructor, I'm able to come along and say, hey, there's a wider world of expertise out there. I don't know every technology that exists. I don't know all these different kinds of linkages, but there are people who are doing it. That doesn't mean that we have to resist the technology just for those reasons. So this is, those are examples of how we integrated the connections. The second element that I want to highlight is the research element. Of course, it's, our class is founded on various frameworks, including the NCTE that I shared with you. We talk about literacy studies. We talk about new media, Mimi Ito and Jenkins and Boyd, some of their work. And we also integrate some elements of critical pedagogy. Tiffany Johnson is a colleague of mine who came in and shared some of her work, as well as some of the things that students brought up that they wanted to discuss more. How does this relate to voice and agency? So it's really important for us to have those frameworks to refer to, and then also it gives students the opportunity to always be considering what their own rationale for use is going to be like. So we refer back to the research in our final compilation for the class, which is an ebook. We talked earlier about the digital afterlife of some of these projects. Well, an important component of our class is that we create a selection of lesson plans and tutorials that allow teachers to share their work integrating technology in the classroom, as well as their rationale for how they came up with those ideas. You'll see I'm going to highlight one of the projects here where they've gone through. This is Media for Our Generation, where a student is having her students explore critical media literacy through technology, and also explaining how the technology here really transforms the assignment from not just creation, but analyzing. And they're able to go through and actually create their own website. Another one here actually was inspired by youth radio, looking at using podcasts in the classroom as an exercise in student voice and expertise. And again, this is the same point we just saw, that students are not only consumers but publishers of information and text, and it's important that they develop those literacy skills accordingly. So those are the kinds of lesson plans, and this becomes a really critical tool that we can then share with other educators who have given to us and, you know, that request it. Another option is that they can create a tutorial for students to learn how to use a digital tool, and so this one is an example of Storify, where a teacher has explained, here's why you might want to use Storify in your classroom, and most importantly, how it furthers the literacy goals. She draws from those key questions from the Center for Media Literacy, which are, again, essential for our course. And we think about, then she gets to experience creating. She created this website that includes teacher FAQs and why you might want to how this furthers some of the NCTE goals for literacy, right? So she's broken down step by step all the ways that Storify might help further the literacy content. So these are examples, again, of how research has been a very important component of our course, and it also shows up in the assessment process as well, where it's important for us to think about the digital compositions that students are going to produce as a result of these kinds of projects. The last design element that I want to highlight is that any use of technology in helping teachers develop their own digital pedagogy must be advocacy driven. And this really gets to the points that Dr. Banks just brought up, thinking about these acts of resistance. We recognize that equity is not, or inequity is not going to change on its own, right? Some of these divides that we see happening between students and different kinds of communities are not necessarily they're not going to just change, right? They're going to stay the way that they are unless we have people who are willing to advocate and model the kinds of shifts that need to occur. So an example of that would be how we sometimes see that there are access is not necessarily always the issue. There may be lots of computers in a school, but what are they used for, right? Computers may come out only at test time when it's necessary for us to kind of get into these standardized assessments and making sure that we have those accountability measures. But what about at the classroom level when we're thinking about how teachers, are they using tools to further their content? Are they using tools to, are we training them, again, to think about how they might really exploit all the affordances of the technology that are there? The question here, is this the next great divide? This is kind of hearkening to literacy theorists who create a significant divide between, we think about literate and non-literate, these various societies, and they can be pretty problematic. However, I think it's important for us to notice that we must also highlight the various literacies that communities are bringing to the classroom, whether or not they're technological. Okay, so although I understand and we need to be conscious of the great divide that exists or the digital divide that exists, it's also important to not allow that to, and this is an argument that I'm continuing to develop, it's important to not allow that to completely separate the intelligences that folks are bringing to the spaces that they're in. So moving beyond that, the access argument, and also thinking about use and the individual creativity that we can see with technology. Finally, a key point that I want to highlight is that advocacy must happen at both the macro and micro levels. So we see that teachers, again, we're talking about developing teacher leaders. We help them to understand that they're able to operate on both of those fronts, right? So at the macro level, they can create site-based initiatives or partnerships with other peers to think about critical use of technology, collaboration, research, and we've seen this even in our first-year teachers. That's part of the joy of doing this work, is being able to go back and see teachers who finished the course and are now just first-year teachers, novices by most standards, but are actually leading some of the advocacy efforts on their campus to get more critical technology instruction, and even writing grants and getting more access to hardware as a first step in bridging some of those divides. But it's also at the micro level in developing lesson plans, being able to have appropriate classroom discourse, and continuing to develop our teacher disposition that will further the advocacy that we need. Here's the key point I want to leave you with, that when it comes to effective technology integration for equity, ultimately it's not about the tools. Instead, it is about developing a robust pedagogy for use and putting our students first. It's also important for us to imagine the constraints and affordances of the technology and think about this concept, again, of being a digital pedagogue across content areas that involves being able to have an articulate rationale for use or non-use, being an early adopter, being willing to embrace and take risks, and always maintaining a learner stance, which is what will move us most aptly into reading and writing for the future. Thank you.
So thank you so much. Oh, let me just make sure this. Does that work? Can you hear me? Okay, good. So again, welcome. I am super honored and so impressed with all of your talks, you know, from everything, from starting with Catlin and then with you three. I had some questions, and I obviously still want to ask them, but I also imagine that a lot of you will have questions and reactions to these like extraordinarily rich talks. And I guess I just want to start us off with one question that I feel has actually come, you know, sort of a topic that has come out in all of our in all of your talks, and you know, it also connects to my own work and clearly to Catlin's work as well, which is this idea of motivation that comes with being public and actually writing in public. And to me, that's maybe a major shift that's really occurred in the last, you know, let's say a decade or so, and in pedagogy probably even, you know, it's even younger. And I'm kind of wondering if you have some thoughts about that. Like, what does that mean? What's sort of the added value of being public in the teacher education, or you know, on social media, or on blogs, or with youth radio, or then also as we prepare students here at Stanford for their instruction and for their own pedagogical life later? What is the value added of being public on social media? And you know, it also has, if I can also mention that, it has its scary side too, right? I do that too. You know, in the classroom, I use Twitter, I use social media, I use blogs, and a lot of times, you know, there's this sort of like, you know, a little bit of a cliff where you sort of have to almost like push the students, or maybe you find that in the teacher education as well. So it's scary, it has its risk, as some of you pointed out, but clearly we all believe in it, and there's something there. So any of you who might want to jump in on that, I would be very interested in hearing a little bit more. What is the value of motivation that comes from being public?
Well, I can speak from the teacher education side. I think, as I mentioned, a high value comes in being able to collaborate with other people and bounce ideas off of people who have been teaching longer than you have, and maybe live in a different place. I know that there are a lot of opportunities for like mystery Skype meetups where classrooms can get together. So there are those. I will say, though, that our teachers had more resistance to being public than I anticipated, and I had at least one, you know, student throughout the whole process who didn't necessarily want to publish some of those things, and that's understandable. I think that some of it has to do with their own conceptualization of using social media, for example, for personal purposes rather than professional. Right. That was something that they definitely said. Like, this is not, you know, I don't want to connect with other people that way. And they had a lot of assumptions that I didn't anticipate, where they said that they thought most people were maybe under 30 and using it for, again, personal social purposes.
Yeah, very good. So that you probably find that you kind of have to sort of have a conversation with, you know, with your students, whoever they might be, or your, you know, the people at Youth Radio about, you know, why should we do this? So it's actually kind of interesting. There's a metacognitive skill kind of built in there, you know, that you kind of need to reckon with from the beginning. Any other reactions from the two of you about being public?
Sure.
Risks, you know, value added?
Yeah, I mean, to use a phrase that I probably haven't used since I was a student in this building, the young people that I work with, it strikes me they're always already public by the time they come into our newsroom, because so much of their lives they share in various ways. And that's a huge, you know, difference compared to, I've been at Youth Radio long enough to know what it was like when the moment that they went public was when they got on the mic for the first time, or when their story actually got on the radio. It's a totally different experience now that so much of them is already out there. But it's not unlike, Cherise, what you're saying, that they have a certain persona that is already part of, you know, who they are to their various communities. And what they produce in the sphere of journalism might not be at all consistent with the stories that they tell about themselves and the impression they make in their existing social media feeds. And so I think that's part of the process, is sort of with them anticipating what it will be like to go out, whether it's with a deeply personal story or with a reported piece where they're positioning themselves as an expert on a certain topic area and are going to need to sort of, you know, interact accordingly in a public way.
Yes, very good. Adam, any thoughts in connecting this to this very powerful idea of decolonizing writing? that must be public, right? So
a portion of it must be, for sure. So I would highlight really important work that a couple of different entities are doing in this regard. So on the one hand, there's a group called the Crunk Feminist Collective. You know, people like Brittany Cooper and many others who there is a really critically engaged kind of public educating that they do through blogs, through Twitter chats, through spaces like that. And then I would highlight the hashtag HipHopEd. Many of you have heard of Chris M. Dean. And the reason I'm spotlighting those two particular endeavors is they highlight something I was trying to get at earlier, and that is that our educations cannot solely be inside these walls. And the people we need to listen to and learn from occupy a lot of different kinds of spaces, you know, in our society, a lot of different kinds of roles. And so being able to get that kind of rich cross-fertilization that gestures toward collective intelligence, right, where we all become stronger, that's one of the ways in which there's value added to get to the premise of your question.
Yes, thank you. You know, one of the things I wanted to ask Catlin, too, about this kind of connects to this role. I feel like this is another sort of highlight for me, that kind of like a strand that comes out in all of your talks, is this idea of being learner-centered or student-centered, and never underestimate what students can do when you know, sort of guide them, of course, but also give them creativity. So I was so impressed by the example of a student, of course, who, you know, went on to give a TED talk, or, you know, the social justice work in the criminal system that, you know, Youth Radio has done. It's quite extraordinary what can happen, right? So, and I guess one of the things that I wanted to ask you, maybe Catlin, you can respond first, is if you have maybe a few more examples to share with us, because I think if there's another sort of scary thing about the future of reading and writing, I think it's that we probably are realizing that we have to give up much more control, yeah, right? You know, not just of the classroom from a sort of learner-centered perspective, but also, you know, being public and working in public. I mean, if you do a role play on Twitter, you just never know what happens. And so I was wondering, can all of you, but especially maybe Catlin, if you can start us off, give us some more examples. Make us courageous. Give us some good ideas.
Well, I think whenever kids, so they have an audience for everything. They're literally, because of social media, any thought they have can be public. And I agree that so many people from even my generation, we weren't used to that growing up, and we really fear what will kids say and do online. And so the knee-jerk reaction is to shut that down and control the whole process. And what's beautiful about technology and all these tools and the ability to publish is that they get to push these ideas out into the world, and with that comes some trepidation. I love your comment about how some of their social media personas are different. So, you know, I've done things like Instagram sensory walks, so they don't do a very good job at, you know, describing their story. You know, they tell me what everything looks like, but I don't get to smell their story and hear their story. So we go on these sensory walks, and kids will say, like, but this is going to, like, show up in my feed, you know? And I'm like, okay, so why is this not okay to be in the feed? Like, blame it on me. And they do digital stories, multimedia digital stories, and post them online. And there is definitely a degree in which we have to educate them about how to protect themselves. One of my most impressive students who gave a talk published her talk online. It was all about redefining feminism and reclaiming this word. And one of the responses to her was horrific. Like, horrific. And so I brought her in and I said, okay, I saw this. She said, I saw it too. She actually took it much more in stride than I did. And I said, okay, so here's how you can navigate YouTube comments. What do you want to do? Do you want to just turn them off? Do you want to moderate them? And she was like, no, I want there to be a dialogue around this. I think it's important. This is a 9th grader. But I'm gonna moderate the comments, and I'm gonna remove this comment because I can. And so, you know, they share beautiful things, and they just need, even though they're in this space all the time, we have to be really cognizant about teaching them how to arm themselves if they are pushing all of these ideas into the world.
Very good. I personally believe, and I think you probably, you know, I hear this sort of as a little bit of a tone in a lot of your thoughts as well, Adam, that, you know, that's actually a really important thing, to acknowledge difficulty, and then also, you know, non-presence, and to bring it forward in the public discourse. But actually, you know, when something like this happens, when the trolls come, to actually teach the kids how to deal with that, right? Because that's going to happen in the real world.
Absolutely.
So it's not just all about, you know, I was asking for stories to make us courageous. This was, I guess, you know, maybe the best one for that, because what comes out of it is that you can actually teach the kids agency and how to, I mean, this is part of digital citizenship, right?
Absolutely.
So I'm very encouraged by that. Other thoughts on
Well,
this?
to your point, though, sometimes we learn from them how to be courageous. And
That's
they
right.
have
Right.
techniques for managing those comments that we may actually then take some notes and bring that into the next interaction. You know, and just a quick example, you saw the slide of my colleague Storm holding up West Side Stories, which was an interactive that sort of maps gentrification in West Oakland. We got, there's a shop that was mentioned, Mandela Foods, I don't know if anybody here is from Oakland, that was mentioned in one of the interviews that we featured on the map as one of the young people who lives in West Oakland associated this market with the changes to the community as opposed to being a market that was set up to serve the community. And so one of the young men who had been one of the developers of Mandela Foods and heard this account of the origins of his enterprise and thought, wait, we set up shop in West Oakland because it was a food desert. We were here to serve the community. We are not about serving the gentrifiers. So we called up quite upset, like, about the way his project was being represented, and we said, we're not in the business of telling young people how they should perceive their worlds, but we are in the business of continuing this conversation. So let's go and interview you, and let's add that to the map. And that was a really amazing moment where I got scared. I got a little like, did we do it wrong? Did we get something? You know, and Sanai Al-Kabalan, who was one of the lead reporters on the story, was like, no, this is where it gets interesting. This is the whole point. This is why it's an interactive. So it's both a combination. I agree with you, Cherise, that the tools are not the answer, but being able to program on platforms that allow for continued updates and iteration, that does help to keep the conversation going and keep the stories flowing.
Yeah, very good. Any other thoughts on this? If not, I want to ask one more question before, directly to this. Okay, go ahead.
I just think, don't we... I was an administrator for about 8 years, and I think that, you know, some of what you're saying and encouraging can be kind of like a catch-22. We're our own worst enemy, and I think there's a lot of systems in place to kind of monitor technology use within schools, and we kind of have to trust the kids. If we aren't giving them that respect and believing that they know how to be responsible, we're kind of holding them back. And I think some of the best tools are when we have those radio stations at school sites. We're bringing in the solar panels so we can do all these great things in community and give the energy back, but yet it's right there. That hub is right there, and we're not utilizing it. And I think that we could also create partnerships within there. So I think you inspire me, all of you. I'm getting these greatness vibes from you. It's just really amazing. And the thing that it also touches base with is how well we can, implement a lot of the technological usages within our school just by promoting like anchor writing standards and college-ready, critical thinking, all those things. But I think mostly, I just wanted to add that we need to trust the kids.
Yes, I totally agree. I think at this. Oh yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'm often as an educator on campus dealing with these like robust filters, and I think that all the time. I'm like, they can literally toggle off the Wi-Fi and watch YouTube videos, and yet I can't show them a video online without using my bypass code. You know what I mean? So I think as educators, we need to march to districts and make a case for things that we want to use and why they're valuable, how they connect to pedagogy. Otherwise, it can be just like you're butting up against all these barriers all the time, and we do it. Kids are in this world. Let's teach them how to be in this world in a safe and responsible way.
Yes, that's great. I have one more question, and then I'm happy to open it up to the audience. This is something that is really important for us here at Stanford, but I think it's also very important topic in general. So I felt like we talked a lot, and rightly so, about writing. And I want to kind of, for maybe just a few minutes, focus on reading. Because one of the things that we're talking about in my office and that I think about a lot because I'm a literature professor is how to kind of really teach research skills. Reading and research is a form of reading, and sort of culling and synthesizing, and really reading deeply and close reading in the digital age. And this is, I think, a thing that sort of an issue that bridges K-12 and college. I mean, we see in college we see the outcome of now if kids can't do that well, we still deal with that. So I guess I just believe that this is really part of digital citizenship as well. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, because of course one of the things that we know is that reading online is different from reading, even if you have a Kindle. Reading a book, we have to have focus. A lot of the reading online, we may focus for a little while, but then we may skip around. And so kind of, research has to do with following a trail and making sense of things. And then especially I was thinking, Adam, as you were talking, about sort of how to inform oneself about really important issues, historical, social, things that you call deep democracy. How to foster that. So if you guys have any thoughts on that, I'd be very interested. How to teach that, how to foster that.
So I'm getting the glances. I'll begin with a thought
well, I
or
started
two.
with Stanford, so
right. You did cue that in the framing, right? So.
Yes.
In my individual teaching, I work with students, whether it's in community-engaged spaces or in the classroom. I use the DJ metaphor of crate digging to talk about ongoing critical research, because the ongoing part is what's crucial, right? It's not just what I have to do to get through this course assignment or to get through this course. And so when we scale out from that point about one person's practice to program building or program leading. So one thing that I'll share is that, it kind of goes back to the argument I was trying to make that this is not tangential work. Stanford, we put students through a 2-course requirement. Now, we do have scaffolded instruction in these areas. We have a writing and a major requirement, for example, that the program in writing and rhetoric works with departments and programs to administer. And so what I'm arguing for is something even more robust that is tiered throughout the entire curriculum, because even when we get to graduate instruction, right, we do so that, almost any department is going to have their research methods courses, right? And you choose early on, are you qual or you quant, or are you trying to synthesize? But some of these critical reading and research and being able to evaluate sources that even need to happen at the graduate student level, we just assume the students are already coming with that because they're talented, right? And even if it's small workshop level stuff or small course, credit-bearing courses, it has to be iterative, throughout, from Frosh through PhD.
Very good.
I would add in that when we think about really youth are reading and writing more than ever with the advent of cell phones in their pockets, and they're sharing articles, and they're, so I feel like that's an entry point for us to think about interrogating some of the research skills that are going to be needed. And that's what I mean by tapping into the literacies that students already possess. So they come and they share articles because they're interesting and things like that. So how can we bring that into the classroom to talk about your sources, or who created this message and who is it for and what's the audience, and rhetorical considerations that might be there.
Or even to recognize who has built this website. Is this an advertisement, or is it,
Right. What are you reposting? What are you sharing? I think those are really nice affordances of the digital age that, again, our students are carrying around in their pockets, sort of more reading and writing than ever before. So now we can leverage that, and we can say, it may not be that exciting to know that we're about to start a research project, but here's the, let's connect it to your life right away. And I think it's just, it becomes that much better for us.
Really thinking of it as an opportunity, I think, rather than an obstacle. Very good. I want to open it up for questions from the audience. Amber, can you, if anybody has a question on anything that happened today, is in the back.
Sorry. I was curious, staying on the subject of reading in the digital age, how you see the role of required reading changing. I was thinking about Catlin's first point about like most teachers when they enter the classroom are given a certain limited number of texts that they can teach. And so I was just curious about hearing how you think the role or the weight of required reading is changing in classrooms.
Absolutely, yeah. So I'm listening to the panel talk about. You're so right. Kids are doing so much reading in these little snippets. But I'll be honest, I get a lot of ninth and 10th graders. They sit in my room and they're like, "I don't like to read," and I'm like, blanket statement. All right, here we go. And so I'm like at ground zero of how do I get these kids to be interested and excited. And I literally, first day of school, they sit on the floor in front of me, and I whip out a picture book, and I read them a story. We do story time every other week in my class. And in the beginning, you can see their eyes. They're just like, crazy person. We were stuck with her all year. But I think what happens for them is that so often they read, and then they're drilled. They didn't get to choose what they wanted to read. They have no control over what happens with the reading they do. We require them to do things with the reading. And so for a lot of them, that joy of pleasure reading is gone by the time I see them. And I get for a lot of teachers, personalizing and giving that choice is scary because it means we're giving up control. We're not marching through the same text with everybody, which on some level is a lot easier to do because we can hit the points we know we should hit because we've been teaching this book for 15 years. I think when we start to explore different teaching models and bringing in technology to give more choice to kids about what they spend their time reading and really connect it to their interests. What do you care about? Okay, so we're studying this topics, but maybe you can read about it through the lens of your choice. And with that freedom is I think, teacher resistance because it requires a whole new skill set in many ways. But I think with it, we have the opportunity to catch kids who have just fallen through the cracks in terms of interest and engagement up until, at least when I see them in high school.
Very good. Another question here? Yes.
Just to add to that, I think I really appreciated you showing Digo because it's one of the tools I use a lot. Because I think what happens is, on paper we're used to being able to write to the text and interact, but then when we get online, the kids have this very passive, unless they're responding in a comment or some very passive experience. They're jumping from thing to thing, and this assumption that they can just transfer the same skills over to digital just doesn't work. Right. And so we have to start looking for, and this is some of the stuff that I do professional development too. We have to look for the tools to give teachers of how to read close online also. It's not just because the paper ones don't work. So things like Digo and things like using Google Docs to do annotations and creating outlines in them and all these different kind of techniques are really critical. And I like the idea that it has to be combined with things that are engaging. So it's not just why should I bother doing deep critical reading if it has no meaning to me? But the tools are there. We have to learn how to give the teachers give them to the teachers so they can utilize them well.
And digital texts don't have the topography that a page-turning traditional book has. So in some ways, it's on us to create those notes, those highlights, those comments, so we can track back to things that we've read.
We have time for one more question.
Great.
So there was some mention of other media forms. You started off with a metaphor around the Funkadelic song, and I'm wondering both how listening and speaking play a role, and also other forms of writing that are not text-based. How can we think about that and talk about that in the digital world?
Very good. Think about the images that you mentioned.
Well, so within the programming, writing, and rhetoric, we divide our two-course requirement. The first course is what we would think of as sort of, I'll use the word standard, even though I just kind of decried it earlier, course in research writing. Written presentation of research, but our second course is about the oral presentation of research, and so that's embedded deeply into our curriculum with equal status with writing in the ways we think of in college, and that same ethos pervades all of the other elements of our program, from the Human Center for Writing and Speaking, right, to our writing in the major requirement. We're encouraging some of our partners who are trying to think about other modalities. Our notation and science communication takes up both visual and oral fully in that series of courses for students. Now, the future of our program for me is at that intersection with this inquiry into the messiness of tech issues as they bear on production across all modalities, and what that's going to do for the practices that we ask students to take up. And so this isn't the time for a reset on our curriculum right now. I think, we're going to have some years of exploring that question together, and then looking at, what practices we need to bring in beyond simply the writing and speaking. We will be offering some courses in visual rhetoric, for example, for the first time in a long time in the next couple of years. And so that's one way that we're trying to deal with that.
Yeah, and I could just say, there's two kind of discourse events at Youth Radio that are more behind the scenes, so I didn't talk about these. We looked at finished products, but two key aspects of process. One is the editorial meeting, and one is the pitch. And that's all about oral presentation and listening and responding. So the editorial meeting is a weekly activity where the young people come. We make assignments based on stuff that's happening in the news. They come with story ideas, and together we kind of refine the ideas and decide what gets assigned and what will be produced. So that is kind of a live event that is very much about oral rhetoric in terms of making the case that your story should go forward. Similarly, when we work on apps and interactives, there's a lot of pitching that happens internally, and then we invite folks from outside, whether it's community members, industry folks, who respond. So every one of these projects, West Side Stories, Mood Ring, started as wireframes that a young person stood up, or like a whiteboard with scribbles on it. And every step along the way, that's being talked about and refined until it gets committed to code or recorded on the mic. And then the last thing in terms of visual storytelling, one of the things that Asha and I learned the hard way when we got this innovation lab off the ground is suddenly every single thing that had to appear as part of our projects we had to make. Like we all became, we were like, wait, that button doesn't just show up. We need to know what color it is, what shape it is, where it is on the page. Every single photo has to be, sized and retouched, and So that was a huge wake-up call when we moved from audio into all these other storytelling forms. So I think you're right on in terms of drawing our attention to that.
Great. I believe we're out of time. I want to thank our wonderful speakers. Thank you so much. This was so inspiring, and I took away a lot. And I think Angela's going to tell us to dance out of here in a funk and not whistle Vivaldi anymore.
Exactly. Before you head out, a couple of announcements that I want to make. This was a fantastic panel. I'm really excited. I'm really excited to keep the conversation going with our campfire chats. Just a couple of things. So we have a full house tonight. We have only one more session left of this seminar series. So for next week, it's supporting homeschool connections through technology. If you have not registered, please go ahead and go to our course website and edfequity.stanford.edu. And at that website, you can find previous sessions that you've missed. We've recorded our sessions, so you can go ahead and go there. And then please take a moment to go to this website, bit.ly EDF Equity. This is where we have our exit tickets, your ticket to the refreshments out there. We love to hear your feedback and questions that you have. So if you can take a second to go ahead and go to this form, it's just a couple of questions. One thing that has been really exciting about the seminar series is the continued conversation that we have after we grab some food. And this week we have campfire chats that are going to continue the conversation. One thing I really appreciate is that we're going to extend it to also our young writers. And I'm really excited that today we have teachers that are part of the techie team at Ravenswood School District, so who will be facilitating these conversations. So we have educators who will be at the table, and please join them. If we could have our facilitator stand up so that we can see you and give you a round of applause. Thank you so much. We really appreciate you being here and helping us guide the conversation. One other announcement, you can also like our Facebook group, and it's a great or join us in social media so that you can keep up to date with what's happening with our seminar series. So
One last. This is an exciting night. I'm just so excited about this night. One last piece I want to say. We are our friends from Mindshift Stories Teachers Share, a podcast being able to share stories. They're here to record your stories as well. And we have one campfire chat that's looking at stories teachers share. So you can, after you grab some food, take a seat at the table. They are right here, right outside these doors. And again, but before you leave, if you can kindly complete the exit ticket. And thank you so much for joining us for EDF Equity by Design. Look forward to seeing you for our last one. And thank you.